himself warned of the threat of a new Cold War.
State Madeleine Albright is meeting Russia's Foreign Minister Igor Ivanov in Oslo. There are hints that Russia might be offered a role in a force to oversee the return of ethnic Albanian refugees back to their homes.
Necessary that the NATO airstrikes have failed to curb the Serbs' ethnic cleansing of southern Kosovo. Thousands more refugees rounded up by Serb forces. A long, slow procession heading into northern Albania. Throughout most of the night, Albanian custom officials logged them in. Nearly 300,000 refugees have passed this way in the last 3 weeks. The brutal depopulation of an entire region that shows no sign of ending. Waiting for the latest arrivals, the UNHCR representative expressed mixed emotions about the expulsions.
From one side, I'm happy to see them coming, because when one person crosses the border, at least I can say, okay, he's alive, we can provide him assistance and it's okay. But at the same time, you know, this is disgusting.
Aid agencies were prepared for the latest influx, with relief supplies stockpiled at the border post. But there was anger and frustration among those responsible for the refugees' welfare.
When you actually arrive here and you see thousands upon thousands of Kosovans who have been turfed out of their homes at gunpoint, have been attacked, coming across this border, that is when the reality actually sinks in. It's beyond comprehension that this is allowed to happen in this day and age. I cannot believe it, absolutely cannot believe it.
Most of these people came from the Pristina region in the south of Kosovo. Like so many others, they've been given just minutes to leave their homes and point their tractors towards the border.
In London and Washington, they're debating the pros and cons of a ground war. For these people, it's all come just a little too late. Peter Sharp, Sky News, on the Albanian-Kosovo border.
A Bari e Durazzo, trasportando aiuti e attrezzature logistiche destinati ai campi profughi allestiti appunto in Albania. Camion carichi di generi di prima necessità giungono da ogni parte d'Italia. Questa sera, ad esempio, è atteso da Trento un convoglio di 24 autocarri e sono moltissime le iniziative analoghe. In tutta la Puglia intanto sono attivi centri di raccolta organizzati dalle associazioni di volontariato e dalle amministrazioni locali.
Sky News on the Hour with Simon McCoy and Vivian Krieger.
Good afternoon. Tony Blair will announce this afternoon that more British troops will be sent to the Balkans. The move comes as there are reports that Serb troops have crossed into Albania, with heavy shelling heard in Tropoje. In other developments in the Kosovo crisis today, the US Secretary of State Madeleine Albright has been having talks in Oslo with the Russian Foreign Minister Igor Ivanov. And NATO's launched an inquiry into the bombing of a passenger train in southern Serbia. These are the main developments in the Kosovo crisis at the end of the third week of bombing. And more troops to the Balkans, the Prime Minister's official spokesman said today. In the Commons, Tony Blair is expected to stress that the move will not be part of the build-up for a NATO land invasion of Kosovo. Alex Crawford reports on continued speculations that a ground war is inevitable.
The NATO soldiers in Macedonia are still officially a peacekeeping force, but a ground war involving British troops now appears to look not only inevitable, but a question of sooner rather than later. Military analysts, consultants and army strategists all appear to agree it's now a question of timing. Contingency plans for a land attack have been drawn up for weeks.
Any military commander who doesn't make contingency plans for every eventuality, including an invasion of Yugoslavia, really shouldn't be in command. So I've no doubt at all that NATO has got contingency plans for everything, including the invasion of Yugoslavia. The thing is, do you do it? And that's a political decision. It's not a military decision, and yes, it can be done.
Lieutenant Colonel Angus Taverner, who's a consultant for the Ministry of Defence, believes NATO wants to dominate the skies before airlifting soldiers into the region to secure vital routes for backup troops.
If you're going to attack, then you would need to secure those routes before you could actually move the main force through. And so to achieve that, I would imagine that they will be considering an airborne assault of soldiers initially, probably using helicopters, having achieved the air superiority that they will need so that helicopters can fly safely.
Repeated denials by NATO politicians about a land attack are not surprising, say the planners, given that any admission would destroy the key element of surprise. But one ground forces analyst believes a land attack, probably as soon as 3 weeks' time, would be launched only once the Serbian army's defences have been seriously crippled. Alex Crawford, Sky News.
The US Secretary of State and the Russian Foreign Minister have been holding talks on the crisis in Kosovo in Oslo. Here, Foreign Secretary Robin Cook has said Russian troops would be welcome as part of an international force sent to police any peace agreement.
The jets fly from the Aviano air base in Italy day and night, but the American Defense Department is considering a request for 300 more aircraft to join the bombing campaign. A request from General Wesley Clark, NATO's Supreme Commander, who's also been hinting at the military argument for putting ground forces into Kosovo. But today in Oslo, American diplomatic attention is turning to the Russian Foreign Minister Igor Ivanov, who'll be talking to the American Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright. The Russians disapprove of the bombing, and the Allies are anxious to recruit them to a peacekeeping force.
We've always made it clear we would welcome the participation of other nations, particularly Russia, and I hope that Russia will be willing to join us in restoring peace to Kosovo and creating the conditions in which the refugees can return and reverse the ethnic cleansing which we've seen so brutally imposed upon them in the last 3 weeks.
French troops have been arriving in Macedonia, part of the 12,000 international NATO force intended as a peacekeeping force. But if NATO changes its mind and sends in combat troops, that is what they'll become. Michael Sullivan, Sky News.
NATO is to investigate the circumstances in which a missile hit a train in southern Serbia, killing 10 people. NATO denies that the train was the intended target. Sky's Tim Marshall was taken to see the wreckage. His reports are subject to Serbian government restrictions.
It was unrelenting. Across Yugoslavia, targets were pounded, the Pančevo oil refinery hit again. NATO and the authorities here both say it's now out of action. We saw thousands of rounds of anti-aircraft fire going up to meet the planes and missiles in the most intense defensive action witnessed so far. We also saw the most shocking error by NATO to date. The pilot must have seen this passenger train 200 miles south of Belgrade. It sat helpless on the tracks underneath the road bridge, which had been badly damaged a minute earlier. The train's power lines had been cut. Eyewitnesses say the plane circled after the first attack, then released 2 more missiles, which smashed through the roof of each passenger carriage.
NATO's target was undoubtedly the bridge, but the train passing underneath it took 2 direct hits. At least 9 bodies have been pulled from the wreckage, and the emergency services are now searching the river. They believe more are there.
Another body was indeed pulled from the adjacent South Morava River. Doctors told us they expected the death toll to rise even further. 16 people were taken to hospital, most with severe burns from the fires which engulfed the carriages. This woman said, "My face has been destroyed. I may be blind. I think the carriage roof fell onto me." NATO acknowledged it had attacked the bridge, saying it was a military target because it's part of a supply line. Yugoslavia called this a war crime. Tim Marshall, Sky News, in southern Serbia.
There are signs a fresh round of ethnic cleansing is underway in Kosovo. Thousands of refugees have flooded into Albania and Macedonia this morning in the biggest influx for days. Sky's Peter Sharp has heard some of their stories.
At a temporary transit camp on the Kosovo-Albanian border, proof, if any was needed, that NATO airstrikes have failed to stop the savage ethnic cleansing of southern Kosovo. They poured across at the rate of 1,000 an hour. 5,000 refugees had passed through by the time the border was closed again. From UNHCR officials, mixed emotions at this latest influx.
From one side, I'm happy to see them coming, because when one person crosses the border, at least I can say, okay, he's alive, we can provide him assistance and it's okay. But at the same time, you know, this is disgusting.
Most had come from Slatina near Pristina airport, where they say they'd been used as human shields against NATO attack. This morning, more stories of atrocities from the recent arrivals. They said one young girl was taken from the convoy by Serb soldiers. When she tried to escape, she was shot dead.
In the border of near Albania, near Jakova, the Serbian force shooting the girl, and they have hurt many people in street from Kosovo in Albania.
Most of these people had been held in a group by the Serbs for 10 days without proper food or water before being sent across last night. But at least one old man had cheated the Serb roadblocks, his life savings hidden in his sock. In London and Washington, they're discussing the pros and cons of a ground war. It's a debate that's come a little too late for the people here. Peter Sharp, Sky News, on the Kosovo-Albanian border.
Hundreds of ethnic Albanian refugees streamed into Macedonia from Kosovo today, filling the fields, which only last week had been cleared of other refugees. Sky's correspondent Keith Graves has been there and joins us now. Keith, we were saying this hasn't happened for some days. What stories do these people have to tell you?
It's a very confused situation here, because some days we have just a few refugees crossing, and then suddenly this morning about 600. In fact, last night another train pulled up the other side of the border. 45 people were taken off it and ordered at gunpoint to walk over the border. Believe it or not, they were made to pay for their tickets from Pristina, one-way tickets. The people who came over this morning told us that they had largely been on the move for about a week. They'd been living in the woods, quite a lot of them. They'd been ordered out of their homes about a week ago, and then they'd been rounded up by the Serbs over the last few days and told, listen, go, you're not coming back, go. We were talking to a United Nations refugee official up there who said their information now was that the city of Urashevac, about 20 miles over the border, now had no more ethnic Albanians in it. That's 50,000 roughly people had been moved out. That one town appears now to have been totally ethnically cleansed. The stories they were telling us were a mixture. Some people just said they'd been ordered out, and then we had the usual stories of atrocities being carried out against people. Of course, it's just not possible to check them, but there are so many, they're so consistent that everybody here believes that they're true.
Macedonian officials, of course, as we know in the past, have been less than welcoming to these refugees. How have they been towards this latest group?
Well, to this group got in a group of buses. They came to this camp. There was no room here, and they've been sent off to another camp, and we seem to have lost track of them. This camp is pretty full. As you can see, these people are just queuing up for their lunch. They have to queue for about an hour, and then they go in. If we could just go into the Italian food tent and show you in here. This is where the people come, and they handed their food here. As I say, they queue for about an hour. Here for lunch, they're being given by the Italian soldiers hot soup, tinned fish and fruit, and it all looks very friendly and relaxed, and indeed it is. But just think about this. This is totally dehumanizing for these people. They've had to leave their homes. Most of them have left their families. They all seem quite friendly and relaxed now, but the fact is that they're totally dependent now on the outside world to stay alive. They have tents to live in. There's nothing else for them here. They come and they queue for at least an hour every time they want a meal. They're handed food, as you can see. They go back to their tents, they hang around, and then in a few hours' time they'll come back and go through this process again. And if you think about it, that is a very dehumanizing experience, and you wonder how long it will be before they're going to get frustrated and there is going to be problems inside this camp.
Keith, for the moment, we must leave it there, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Mrs. Sky.
Уважаемые дамы и господа, завершилась наша встреча с государственным секретарем США госпожой Олбрайт. Встреча была проведена в соответствии
in accordance with agreement between the presidents of our countries. And the aim was, the purpose was to find the new ways, for the political settlement in the Balkans, to put an end to bloodshed and violence. Myself and Mrs. Albright, we are in constant touch about this, and it's understandable. Now we're speaking about not only about the Balkans, but also about the future of Russia-US relationship. Our conversation, of course, was not very simple. the position of Russia as far as the power action of NATO against Yugoslavia is concerned remains the same. But the most important thing, in Oslo, we put a common aim to us, to find a way out from the impasse. And we were talking not only what separates Russia today from the United States, but about the approaches which would lead to the settlement.
Good morning from Tirana. We can confirm there have been an incursion of Yugoslav forces in northeastern Albania. The Kamenica border post has been attacked and the houses burned in the nearby villages.
Can you tell us more about the size of this incursion?
We know that light infantry was involved. However, at the moment, we don't have any suggestion that they have moved further into Albanian territory.
And are they still on Albanian territory?
Well, that's also hard to assess at the moment. As you know, our unarmed monitors, they have to keep a distance from the tense situation, and this is something we can check later on. But at the moment, we can confirm there have been an incursion.
Can you tell us what size of incursion? You talked about infantry. What kind of size of numbers across the border?
Unfortunately, we don't have this information as we speak.
And are Albanian border guards reporting to you? Any information they have?
Yes, they inform us they have withdrawn from the border post for the time being.
So the Serbs have seized a border post, is that what you're saying?
That's at least for some time, yes. This is something that happened, I think, less than 2 hours ago. So we have to wait and see whether this is an isolated incursion, and as you know, there have been other incursions in the past. Of course, we are fully aware that this is the 4th day of consecutive exchange of fire, including artillery in that area, but still, let's hope that this is going to be again.
Indeed, Mr. Angeli, you know as well as I do that these are some of the worst border clashes that we've seen the last 2 days. Indeed, we've had reports that 2 dead and 9 were wounded in the last few days on this exact border. It's an escalation of the crisis, isn't it?
Well, to be honest with you, we know there have been also more casualties there, but and of course, I mean, it's an obvious escalation. But
Vivian Krieger.
Good afternoon. Tony Blair will announce this afternoon that more British troops will be sent to the Balkans. The move comes amid reports that Serb troops have crossed into Albania with heavy shelling heard. These are the main developments in the Kosovo crisis at the end of the 3rd week of bombing.
Russia and the United States have agreed to disagree about ways to end the warring in Kosovo. But after talks between the US Secretary of State Madeleine Albright and the Russian Foreign Minister Igor Ivanov, they said they would keep up talks to find a political solution.
The Yugoslav media says petrol production has ground to a halt after a series of air attacks on oil refineries. A key NATO aim has been to stop President Milosevic's army from carrying out its ethnic cleansing in Kosovo by destroying fuel supplies.
Powerful explosions rocked the Kosovo capital Pristina after NATO attacked an army barracks there. NATO also attacked a military barracks in Belgrade. The British Foreign Secretary Robin Cook said 3 times as many Allied planes were involved last night in attacks on Kosovo as last week.
The UN says Yugoslav forces appear to be engaged in a mopping-up operation after thousands of refugees poured out of Kosovo today. About 3,000 crossed into Albania at the main border crossing this morning, and hundreds of refugees arrived in Macedonia in the biggest influx in days.
In just over an hour's time, the Prime Minister will give details of the latest deployment of British troops in the Balkans. Although speculation about a ground war continues, Mr. Blair is expected to say that more troops will only be deployed after the successful outcome of airstrikes.
NATO soldiers in Macedonia are still officially peacekeepers, but a ground force involving British troops now appears to look not only inevitable, but a question of sooner rather than later. Military analysts, consultants and army strategists all appear to agree it's now a question of timing.
Any military commander who doesn't make contingency plans for every eventuality, including an invasion of Yugoslavia, really shouldn't be in command. So I've no doubt at all that NATO has got contingency plans for everything, including the invasion of Yugoslavia.
Lieutenant Colonel Angus Taverner, who's a consultant for the Ministry of Defence, believes NATO wants to dominate the skies before airlifting soldiers into the region to secure vital routes for backup troops.
To achieve that, I would...
Tense exchanges of fire between the Kosovo Liberation Army guerrillas and Serb forces in the border region, some 190 miles north of the capital Tirana, during the last 5 days.
America and Russia have narrowed their differences over Kosovo, according to the US Secretary of State. Madeleine Albright has been holding talks in Oslo with the Russian Foreign Minister in an effort to win their support. Within the last hour, they gave a news conference.
Belgrade confirms that for us.
Sorry, once again, I didn't.
Belgrade is denying that its forces have made an incursion into your territory and taken over the village of Kamenica.
Well, I don't know what do they say, but we have also the confirmation here of the OSCE representatives.
Is the KLA recruiting, is it operating in any way in northern Albania?
Well, KLA people are just rank-and-file people of Kosovo that have suffered under this kind of genocide policy and ethnic cleansing there. And when they cross to the Albanian border with their own families to bring them here and to find some accommodations for them, so they'd like to return back and find for their freedom in Kosovo. So perhaps this kind of movement has created and has irritated, I should say, the Serbian forces, and of course they are waging different kind of military operations against them, which used to last for hours, especially last night, but also extended on our territory as well.
Mr. Gjoko, what are your forces doing to retake the village?
Of course, the Albanian government is already assembled now and is discussing the situation, the new situation, and I think that in close coordination with our allies and especially with NATO forces, we are going to take the necessary steps.
When we found 11-year-old Flanza Asufi at the weekend, all she could do was weep. She told us she and her brother Alordin had lost their mother 10 days ago. They'd been separated in Kosovo, and it seemed then had little chance of finding each other. But this tale of despair was to have a rare happy ending. Flanza's mother managed to find her children because, by chance, some friends had seen our report.
Some friends told me last night that they saw her on Sky News. I'd like to thank everybody who helped me to find my mother.
But while this family is finally back together, many others are still searching for their loved ones. It is a near impossible task. The hundreds of thousands of people who fled from Kosovo are now scattered at refugee camps across the region. So many were separated at the border that some may never be traced. Emma Hurd, Sky News, Stankovic, Macedonia.
Within NATO and as well as the United States specifically, that the widening of this conflict by the Serbs to the other countries in the region would have serious consequences.
Overnight, NATO airstrikes continued to target Yugoslavia's fuel supplies. Serb radio said a British Harrier aircraft had been shot down. Britain's Ministry of Defence has categorically denied losing any aircraft. Hello and welcome to this special edition of The World Today. I'm Lindsay Brancher. The United States has warned Serbia of serious consequences if it widens the conflict over Kosovo following reports of a Serbian incursion into northern Albania. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe says it believes that Serb-like infantry have occupied the border post at Kamenica and at least 2 villages have been burned. There's been fighting between Serb forces and the Kosovo Liberation Army near the border in recent days. NATO says it's investigating. Earlier, the British Foreign Secretary Robin Cook said air raids had been stepped up against targets in Yugoslavia, but the Defence Ministry has categorically denied that any British aircraft was shot down during last night's raids. Meanwhile, the US Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, has held a meeting with her Russian counterpart, Igor Ivanov, in Oslo. Afterwards, both said the Kosovo problem would require diplomatic intervention to end it. In about a half an hour from now, the British Prime Minister, Tony Blair, is expected to announce the deployment of more British troops to the region. We'll be staying on air to bring you that statement live from Westminster here on BBC World. But first, Janet Barry has this report on the latest developments in the Kosovo crisis.
Speaking after the talks in Oslo, Madeleine Albright condemned the Serb incursion into northern Albania. The news came after the US-Russian meeting had ended with little sign of a breakthrough. Mrs. Albright said they agreed at least on what should happen to achieve peace in Kosovo.
We have reached agreement on many of the basic principles that must be respected in any resolution of the crisis in Kosovo. For example, that there needs to be an immediate and verifiable end of violence and repression in Kosovo, that there has to be withdrawal from Kosovo of military, police, and paramilitary forces, that there has to be unconditional and safe return of all refugees and displaced persons, regardless of their ethnicity or religion, and for allowing the international humanitarian organizations unhindered access to fulfill their functions throughout Yugoslavia and in the first place in Kosovo.
Mr. Ivanov said Russia's position remained unchanged, but there had been some diplomatic progress.
The aim was, the purpose was to find the new ways, for the political settlement in the Balkans, to put an end to bloodshed and violence. Myself and Mrs. Albright, we are in constant touch about this, and it's understandable. Now we're speaking about not only about the Balkans, but also about the future of Russia-US relationship.
French troops arriving in Albania, part of an advanced guard which will eventually make up an 8,000-strong NATO force protecting Kosovan refugees. The West believes Russia could eventually take part in a similar peacekeeping force in the region. The American government has said protecting refugees was not set down as a specific NATO task. The way could be open for Russia to join in. Western military officials are on their way now to expand